We are here at Granny's Legacy working on our Solar Flair project this morning, and we are all the way done except for the four corners. And to set out and to decide where to put that wool applique in your four corners, what I have done is I have marked through the center of my triangle. And so using my big 12.5-inch square up ruler, I really love this ruler for this project. I have marked a line with the air erase marker. I have marked a center line here, and I've also marked 2 inches in from each edge. And by doing that, I was able to center all 4 of my corner appliques identically. So I centered my wool applique right in that area that I had marked off. So hopefully that will help you with getting your wool applique. All 4 corners were marked out like that. I pinned out my wool applique, pressed it, steamed it down, fused it, and then I did my embroidery. So now I'm ready. I've got my entire back sewn together. I followed the instructions on how to put it together, and now I'm ready to decide where my corners should go. And so when I was laying out the corners, I kind of just laid it on here, and I kind of just kept folding up and folding up and folding up till I got to a place where I really liked how it looked. Keeping in mind that I wanted to make sure that when I trim this down, I don't want to trim into my wool applique. So there again, using a ruler, I knew I was going to be trimming my wool applique right here, 1/4 inch on those corners. So I want to make sure I keep this in far enough so it's not out here in the binding, or I don't sew over it or cut it off when I put my binding on. And I wanted to make sure it was far enough out that it fit the corner and framed it. So I decided on 3/4 of an inch from here to here was what I liked. And so laying that on, I measured 3/4 of an inch past the tip of my applique. And put a small mark. And then I took my square up ruler because I really want to make sure that this corner stays true. And so I laid that on here, keeping the corner marked here. And I discovered 7 inches is what I liked. So I drew a line at 7 inches. Or I drew a line from here to here. This point is 7 inches. I kind of like that. So I trimmed off 1 1/4 inches of each block. So I just took my ruler at 1 1/4 and trimmed off that corner. That long side. So it's the long side of this I trimmed off. And now I will mark every single one the center. I really need to know that center point. And I will also mark the center point of this. So I'm going to put my ruler on here. And it should be 11 inches, which it is. And so I'm going to mark 5.5 inches right here. So when I sew these together, I will line up those. So then I will know that when I stitch this, 1/4 inch seam allowance, I know that point will follow through and be exactly in the corner. So I'm going to stop and go to my sewing machine and get all 4 of my corners sewn on now. So we now have our 4 corners sewn on, and as with putting our setting triangles on, we have the little ears that we need to trim off. So I always take my ruler just to make sure I don't trim more than I need to, and I trim off my little ears, and then I do a really good job of setting my seam allowance and then pressing my seam back. So your seam are facing out. So you'll take this to the ironing surface and get this all ironed out. So there you are, 4 beautifully placed corners and 1 step closer to finishing your Solar Flair. So now we have a completed Solar Flair quilt top ready to be trimmed. So we made all of our setting triangles oversized to allow for trimming on the outside to make a very square, even quilt. And so we need to get rid of this excess that we have. So what I like to do is I have decided that I want my binding to come right at these points. So I'm going to take a long ruler and I'm going to add a 1/4 inch, because your binding will use up a 1/4 inch. And if you want to leave a 1/2 inch, you can, whatever you would like. This is your quilt. But I've decided, so every point here where these seam allowances come together, I'll mark it there. I want to add a 1/4 inch to that because I would like my binding to come to that point. So I'm going to take an air erase marker and mark that, because I feel uncomfortable just taking off and stitching that. And so this, once again, I'm going to do this side, adding a 1/4 inch to those seam allowances. And
so you're going a 1/4 inch past the point.
1/4 inch past the
and
point.
Marking, so you can see it first, and then you'll go back and cut it once you can see it.
Exactly. And then I'd like to take my square up ruler, and I really like to do this on the corners rather than just mark. I like to have the corners really, really square. So I'm using it so the 1/4 inch, once again, is on the points, and I'm going to mark those corners to be extremely square. And I'll continue this same process around the entire quilt, and then I'll go ahead and trim it, because I don't want to make a mistake. I want to make sure I have everything correct before I start my trimming. So I'm trimming with the ruler over the quilt. That way, if I did have an accidental cut, I would not cut my quilt top. And I'm just going to take along and trim those off and square up all the way around my entire quilt. And square it all up and make it exactly square. And being that these are oversized, it really allows us much more freedom in deciding and squaring our quilt, so that if one of them doesn't happen to be exact, you won't notice it because the binding is also yellow, but it gives you the freedom to have a very square, even quilt. So there you have it, a finished Solar Flair quilt top ready for the quilter. I would say that before I send my quilt tops to the quilter, I based around the entire edge of the quilt with 1/8 of an inch, right inside 1/8 of an inch. And that keeps all the seams from stretching open during the quilting process. So thank you for joining us on this journey at Granny's Legacy Patterns.